Welcome to All Right in Sin City, a podcast about writers and writing in the Windsor-Detroit region. Your podcasters today are
Irene Moore Davis, author, educator, and local historian.
Sarah Jarvis, former bookseller, publishing rep, and literary festival chair.
and me, Kim Conklin, Windsor-based writer and filmmaker.
Welcome. This recording takes place online with safe physical distancing. Our featured guest today is Karen Dionne. Karen Dionne is the USA Today and #1 internationally best-selling author of the award-winning psychological suspense novel, The Marsh, King's Daughter. It was published by G.P. Putnam's Sons. Karen has been active in the writing community for over 20 years. She co-founded the online writers community Backspace, organized the Backspace Writers Conferences in New York and the Bahamas, and served on the board of directors of the International Thriller Writers Organization. Originally from the Detroit area, Karen and her husband moved to 10 acres in Michigan's Upper Peninsula when first married. They lived there for 30 years before moving back to Greater Detroit. She has described her previous book, The Marsh, King's Daughter, as a love letter to the Upper Peninsula. Her new book, The Wicked Sister, is also set there. Here's a bit of an introduction to The Wicked Sister. For 15 years, Rachel Cunningham has lived in a psychiatric facility in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, tortured by gaps in her memory and the certainty that she is responsible for her parents' deaths. When she is confronted by evidence that tells a different tale, she realizes her self-imposed exile may have been a terrible mistake. She decides to sign herself out of the hospital and return to the isolated lodge where her parents died and where her older sister Diana still lives. We learn early in the book that Diana's involvement in an unspeakable tragedy is what forced the family to relocate to the lodge before Rachel was born. Information Rachel does not have as she returns to the lodge. Very interesting. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be able to talk about my novel with y'all.
We're excited to have you. So living in a cabin in the woods for 30 years sounds very romantic. Is there anything that you miss about that lifestyle?
I miss it terribly. I miss being in the woods. I live in the suburbs now. And when I take photographs of my garden or my yard, I always try to position the camera where you can't see other houses. I just love that isolation. I've often said that if you showed me 10 pictures of places where I could live, from like a crowded city to a remote mountaintop, I'd be on that mountaintop. So I miss the quiet, I miss the isolation, I miss, the details of nature that were just part of our everyday life when we lived in the Upper Peninsula.
Is that what you like about setting your novels in the Upper Peninsula? In your head, you can go there and be somewhere different?
Yes, and in fact, when I wrote The Marsh, King's Daughter, the idea for the book came to me in the middle of the night. The character started speaking to me. It was one of those situations. And the next morning, I almost gave the book an urban setting, because The Marsh, King's Daughter is about it tells the story of a woman who is the daughter of a kidnapped victim and the man who took her. So I almost gave the book an urban setting because I was thinking about the young women in Cleveland and how for so many years they were hidden away essentially in plain sight. And as an author, I thought, well, how can such a thing happen? How can people not know what's going on in that house? And it seemed like something I might like to explore. But I decided that was maybe a little obvious. And so at the last minute, I set the book in a cabin on a ridge surrounded by marsh in the Tequamanon River Valley in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, where I lived. And that turned out to it opened up the whole story for me, because as I was writing the book, there were so many times when I would include a detail and I would think to myself, I never would have found that detail no matter how much I researched online. Because when my husband and I moved to the Upper Peninsula, we wanted to feel closer to the land. So we paid attention to nature. And, I know what kind of land the blueberries grow in and what time they ripen. And, I can tell that they're bushes even if it's winter and you can't see any leaves on them. And, we knew the kind of trees and the bird calls and things like that. So all of that was woven into the story as I was writing it, plus incidents and things that had happened to us. For instance, early on in the novel, Helena talks about how every spring her father would go out to the marsh and he would dig up a marsh marigold. Others know them as cowslips, but they're beautiful yellow bushy flowers, very prolific in the Upper Peninsula. He would dig one up and put it in a galvanized tub and bring it home and put it on their front porch, where Helena says it glowed like he'd brought us the sun. Well, every year my husband used to do that. So that made the novel, for me, it was just a joy to write the book set in a place that I myself love.
So, yes, you mentioned how Helena came to you in the middle of the night, which is a really cool story. How did Rachel appear to you? Do you remember?
Yes, Rachel was inspired by an incident I read about a long time ago. I have kind of a file of interesting news stories that intrigue me. And this was an incident where a toddler found a handgun in his mother's purse. He was sitting behind her in the car, and he shot and killed her. And, you know, it just always stuck with me because I thought at some point this little boy is going to grow up. You know, he's going to find out what he did. And so how will that knowledge affect him at that point? You know, how could you go forward knowing that you had killed your mother, even though it was unintentional and unknowing? So Rachel has the same situation. You know, she believes she's responsible for her parents' deaths. And that's what's basically sent her into a tailspin for her life. She's living in the mental hospital as self-imposed penance for her childhood crime, or so she thinks. But you know, in a thriller or a story with mystery elements, there's always plot twists and turns. So basically the book is about her journey to find the truth.
So both Helena and Rachel are rich, complex characters who seem to be fighting with their own self-doubt and their love for the people who torture them, in part because that type of behavior is all they've ever known. What is it about that kind of character that appeals to you or intrigues you as a writer?
Again, that goes back to something that's just always been a part of me. I've always been intrigued by people who overcome a less than perfect childhood to make something out of themselves. I remember as a kid reading in the Reader's Digest magazine, and you know, they would have experiences of, let's say it's a husband and a wife who came from abusive backgrounds, but they got married and they fostered 100 kids and they all got PhDs. You know what I'm saying? And I would think to myself, even as a child, how does that happen? How can you like not be a prisoner of the way you were raised? How do you rise above it? And so I agree that Helena and Rachel both have a similar character arc in that they have to make something of themselves despite, as I call it, a less than perfect childhood.
One thing they have in common is isolation. Do you think that makes them more relatable or universal characters?
I like the isolation because I think it strips the story down to its essence. Helena's situation is more extreme because for the first 12 years of her life, she doesn't see another person except her mother and father. And of course, she accepts this as normal. And her father grooms her to be like a little mini me. And she's a tomboy. She loves hunting and fishing and foraging, and she loves her father. She doesn't have much of a relationship with her mother because, again, she's been groomed for that. As her father shows disdain for her mother, that's what she learns, you know, from him. But what I like about that as a writer is that because there are no other adults in her life, I maintain that you could even say that Helena's love for her father is a purer love than any child has ever had for its father. Because again, there are no other adults in her life, no grandparents, no teachers, no other outside influences. And so it gives me a chance to explore the father-daughter relationship on a really deep and heightened level. So I think isolation does that. Whatever emotions the characters are feeling, they're amplified because of the isolation.
You've talked about how you love fairy tales, and in The Marsh King's Daughter, you integrate the fairy tale into the book. And The Wicked Sister also has a fairy tale kind of ring to it, or some nods to fairy tales. What fairy tales are you drawing from in the second book?
Yeah, I actually looked for a fairy tale that I might structure the second book on, but none spoke to me the way that the Marsh King's Daughter did for the Marsh King's Daughter. And so, the book is named the same as the fairy tale. So what I did was I was inspired by several fairy tales. The White Snake by the Brothers Grimm was one. The element that I'm using in that is the main character in that fairy tale believes that he can understand the languages of insects and animals. And that's an element that I use in The Wicked Sister. Rachel believes that she has that ability too. And then I also used Snow White and Rose Red. That's a fairy tale where two sisters make friends with a bear in the winter that turns out to be, an enchanted prince, because of course, why wouldn't he be? And so bears also feature quite largely in The Wicked Sister. And there are two sisters as well. But, there are a lot of fairy tale elements, like this beautiful hunting lodge where the family grows up that's been in the family for generations. The great-great-grandfather who built it, he had a fascination with fairy tales. So for instance, in the gun room, there's a stained glass window that depicts the fairy tale of The 12 Huntsmen by the Brothers Grimm. And the beautiful staircase that goes to the second floor is birch logs cut in half. So the ends are like half round and they're painted with fairy tale scenes. So, and even Rachel and her sister, as they're growing up, they enact fairy tales as they play, like Hansel and Gretel. Why wouldn't you? Because you're growing up in a forest and you only have your sister to play with. So, and then the whole setting of this beautiful log cabin in the middle of an isolated forest that is almost a fairy tale in itself, So that's how I ended up handling the fairy tale element for The Wicked Sister.
So thrillers are frightening by design, and the original versions of fairy tales can be quite scary as well. Why do you think readers are drawn to stories that are so dark and fearful?
I love them since I was little. And when I speak at book events and I ask people who, in attendance, who grew up reading fairy tales, everyone raises their hands. I think we all just cut our teeth on fairy tales, and not necessarily the Disney-fied versions, the dark ones. I think the language is so lush, particularly the language that Hans Christian Andersen uses in The Marsh King's Daughter. I have an excerpt from the fairy tale at the beginning of the book, and the last line is talking about how the Marsh King's daughter, who was a stump that this beautiful Egyptian princess sits on, but it turns into the evil Marsh King's daughter who takes her under the water. And the last line is, "Great black bubbles rose from the slime, and with these every trace of the princess vanished." Oh, that's just so beautiful. Even though it's very dark, yeah, it's true. And there was another line, because the fairy tale is interspersed throughout. As I was writing the book, I sent chapters to my agent, and there is another line from the fairy tale that I quote that talks about how Helga, who the Marsh King's daughter of the fairy tale, was a wild child. And the line is, "She used to wash her hands in the blood of the horses that were sacrificed for slaughter." And my agent wrote in the margin, "Where do you find this stuff?" I said, "Well, it's fairy tales. It's been around for a very long time."
Yeah. So
Really?
the darkness of the real Grimm's fairy tales sort of reflects us, and nowadays we know about psychopaths, and they're not just evil, but there's an issue. So is it disturbing to you to write about that kind of mental imbalance in people and characters?
I don't find it so. I think it's realistic. Many years ago, I knew of a family, and they adopted 3 children, and 2 of the children flourished in the new environment, but the oldest child had some serious issues. And eventually, because they couldn't control his behavior and he became violent toward his brothers and sisters, they had to put him in an institution. So they had to make a choice between that child and the other children, and they love them all. And it just really sticks with me. It's almost like a Sophie's choice sort of thing, right? How are you going to deal with that? I have 4 children, and fortunately they're all super intelligent and wonderful human beings, right? But what if I didn't? And those are the sorts of what if things that writers like to explore. Many people have less than perfect childhoods, or their parents are not very good. And so again, these are the things that interest me to explore in my fiction.
Skin also plays an important role in your books. Helena was heavily tattooed by her father, and she hunts and fishes, skinning animals and that. And Rachel's older sister is a taxidermist, and at one point she carves a message into Rachel's skin. How do you think about skin and what that means to the characters as you were writing?
That is a very interesting question that I have never been asked before. So I'll have to think about that for just a moment. I guess it's probably because it's about as personal as it can get, right? Like when most people, when they get a tattoo, they've chosen to permanently mark their skin with whatever that tattoo might be. But we get marked in other ways, scars, from an accident or burns or something like that. So maybe it's just, the outward, the visible manifestation of what we might be inside.
How do you achieve that breathtaking pace that you have in your writing?
It's something that has to be learned. I will say that. I've been writing seriously for 20 years. And my very first novel, I didn't know anything about the business. I wrote the book and I thought, well, I want to be published with a major publisher, so now I need a literary agent. And I started looking for an agent with the first draft of that novel. Well, I did find an agent who loved the premise of the story, and he thought my writing was strong and I could pull it off with a rewrite, because what was wrong with the book was I gave away the key piece of knowledge in chapter 5. And I didn't realize that until he pointed it out to me. So, the pace and the plotting was a mess in that book. And we worked together on it for about 3.5 years through 3 complete rewrites. And then we finally were so sick of working on it, he sent it out to editors, and we didn't get a sale. But the next book that I wrote, when we did sell that one, and when reviews started coming in and it praised the pace and the momentum, I was like, yes, I learned something. So I think it's something that you just have to, of course, you have to read a lot and read the kind of books that you like to write as far as things like pace and momentum and other craft aspects are concerned. But I think you just learn from doing.
Do you have a behind the scenes technique to maintain that kind of plotting for a thriller?
I do a lot of rearranging, to be honest, because in my early drafts, I tend to rush the story. I tend to hurry through it. And I tend to even skip over scenes that should be written because I'm just eager to get the story down. So, for instance, with the Marsh King's Daughter, there was one point where I printed out the manuscript and I cut it into scenes and I laid it out on a very long table, and I physically rearranged the scenes almost like storyboarding, because it's Helena telling her story both in the past and the present, and it's a series of linked incidents. It's possible to rearrange them for effect. So that's one thing that is actually very fun for me to do, is to find the best way to tell the story. And you hold back knowledge of this or that. As an author, what's coming. I know what the last sentence of the book is going to be, and I'm like the horse getting near to the barn. I want to hurry and get to that point. But the thing is, and I heard this said one time, a writer takes so much time to put the reader into a scene. Let them enjoy it. Don't yank them out of it right away. So get everything that you can out of the book for the enjoyment of the reader.
So a lot of writers have a circle of early readers that they trust. Who are your circle of writers that you trust? Who's your sounding boards?
I have had different people over the years. When I was writing my early novels, which were science-based thrillers, I had as a writing partner a medical doctor who also wrote science-based thrillers. And as it happened, we had the same editor for our first books. So he would read my books to make sure I got the science correct, and I would read his to make sure that a normal person could understand them. So he was my first partner in that regard. And then I kind of got away from working with another writer and wrote on my own for a couple of books, with my agent, of course, being the first reader. And then for The Marsh King's Daughter, a writer I respected who was published offered to beta read for me as I wrote the book. And I thought, okay, I'll give that a try. And she was extremely helpful. But I'm working on another one now, and I'm working on it by myself. So I guess it's kind of all over the place as far as do I lean on a group or not? Yeah.
So what is it that you're writing now?
I'm writing a third novel, a psychological suspense, also set in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. And this one is going to take place in Grand Marais, which is a very little town on the shore of Lake Superior. It's a town of about 300 people. The Marsh King's Daughter takes place near there, and this is going to take place in the town. So in The Marsh King's Daughter, I focus on the marsh, or the swamp, or the wetland. And in The Wicked Sister, it takes place in a forest. But Michigan is surrounded by 4 of the 5 Great Lakes, and Lake Superior is so amazing. And, it really shapes Upper Peninsula life. So I wanted to, in this book, the lake is going to be a character almost to the extent that, the swamp and the forest are in my previous 2 novels. And this one explores a relationship between a grandmother and a granddaughter. So something a little different.
Interesting. Will that be a sequel to The Wicked Sister, or would that be a separate book?
It'll be a separate book, yes. All of my novels are standalones. When Putnam bought The Marsh King's Daughter, it was a 2-book deal, so they bought the second book sight unseen. And so when it came time to have a discussion with my editor as to what would the second book be, he laid out 4 criteria that he felt that the story should share with The Marsh King's Daughter. It should be, again, a psychological suspense. It should be set in a same or similar setting. It should have a fairy tale element, and it should have an intricate structure. And I was especially pleased that he named those last 2, because those were the elements that I was proudest of in The Marsh King's Daughter. But then, of course, for me, the challenge became to write the second book without making it a copy of The Marsh King's Daughter, So that's The Wicked Sister. This third book is not going to have a fairy tale element at all, but it does have a little surprise thing that's similar to that. I won't say what it is, but it's going to parallel a famous novel. So it'll fit right in, I hope.
Interesting. And what is that relationship with you? It sounded like your agent did extensive work with you at first, which is fantastic. And now you've switched to an editor in a big publishing house. What's that back and forth like for you?
Yeah, that's a very interesting thing, because, all of a sudden my agent, we've been together for 21 years. So that's a very long time. And we know each other very well. If he makes a suggestion and I don't like it, I don't hesitate to say so. We have a very good relationship. And so now you have an editor in the mix. And I will say, so generally speaking, then the agent steps back and, you are handed off to the editor. Working with my editor was really, really a dream, because his stated goal for the book was to make it the Marsh King's Daughter the best version of itself that it could be. So he made suggestions, things that he saw, subtle things that even I hadn't yet realized were there or could be brought out more strongly. And so the Marsh King's Daughter, it sold in May of 2016. And then he sent me his editorial letter, with his overarching suggestions. I worked on the novel for a couple of months, showed it to my agent first, because we can't cut him out completely. And then, sent it on to my editor, and we discussed certain points and like that. So I'm very fortunate, because my editor is extremely well respected in the thriller world. And he edits a lot of major names like Clive Cussler and T. Jefferson Parker and Lisa Gardner and Lisa Scottolini. So I'm really fortunate to have someone with that understanding of the genre to be able to help me get the books up where they should be.
So would you like to read a bit of your novel for us? And we can hear a little bit of that. Yeah.
Yes. The opening of The Wicked Sister is very short. And so, as we've mentioned already, it opens with Rachel in the mental hospital in self-punishment for what she believes she did as she's a child. So the opening chapter starts in Rachel's voice. Rachel says, "Sometimes when I close my eyes, there is a rifle in my hands. My hands are small. My fingers are pudgy. I'm 11 years old. There's nothing special about this particular rifle, nothing to distinguish it from any other Remington, except that this is the rifle that killed my mother. In my vision, I am standing over my mother. The rifle is pointing at her chest. Her mouth is open and her eyes are closed. Her chest is red. My father runs into the front hallway. 'Rachel,' he screams when he sees me. He drops to his knees, gathers my mother in his arms, looks up at me, his expression an unfamiliar jumble of shock and horror. He rocks my mother for a long time, as if she is a baby, as if she is alive. At last he lays her gently on the worn parquet floor and gets slowly to his feet. He takes the rifle from my trembling hands and looks at me with a sorrow greater than I can comprehend and turns the rifle on himself. 'Not so,' says the golden orb spider from the middle of the web in a corner of my room where the cleaners never sweep. 'Your father killed your mother, and then he killed himself.' I don't understand why the spider is lying. Spiders normally tell the truth. 'How do you know?' I can't resist asking. 'She wasn't there when my parents died. I was.' The spider regards me solemnly from 8 shiny eyes. 'I know,' she says. 'We all know.' Her spiderlings skitter about the edges of the web as insubstantial as dust motes and nod. I want to tell the spider that she is wrong, that I know better than anyone what happened the day my parents died, and I understand the consequences of my childhood crime better than she ever will, because I've been living with them for 15 years. Once you've taken someone's life, it breaks you, shatters you into so many infinitesimal pieces that no one and nothing can put you together again. Ask any drunk driver who killed a pedestrian, any hunter who thought the friend or brother-in-law he shot was a deer, anyone who held a loaded rifle when she was too young to anticipate what was about to happen. My therapists say I'm suffering from complicated grief disorder and promise I'll get better in time. My therapists are wrong. I'm getting worse. I can't sleep, and when I do, I have nightmares. I get frequent headaches, and my stomach hurts all the time. I used to think constantly about killing myself until I realized that living in a mental hospital for the rest of my life is the greater punishment. I eat, I sleep, I read, I watch TV, I go outside. I breathe the warm summer air, feel the sun on my skin, listen to the birds chirp and the insects hum, watch the flowers bloom and the leaves turn and the snow fall, and through it all, always, always in the front of my mind and deep in my heart burns this terrible truth. I am the reason my parents will never see, smell, taste, laugh, or love again. My parents are dead because of me. The police ruled my parents' deaths a murder-suicide perpetrated by my father. All the news reports I've been able to find agree. Peter James Cunningham, age 45, murdered his wife, Jennifer Marie Cunningham, age 43, for undetermined reasons, and then turned the rifle on himself. Some speculate that I saw my father shoot my mother and that's why I ran away. Others that I found my parents' bodies, and this is what sent me over the edge. I would have told them that I was responsible if I had been able to speak. When I came out of my catatonia 3 weeks later, I made sure that everyone who would listen knew what I had done. But to this day, no one believes me, not even the spider.
Thank you very, very much. We really appreciate you joining us and talking with us about your new book. It's great.
Thank you. It's been a wonderful opportunity. And I just want to add that, thank you for what you're doing, to connect readers and writers. And it just is a wonderful thing and that you're carrying on despite the situation that we're living in now. It's great. So thanks for having me.
And your book is coming out. Remind us again when your book is coming out.
Oh, yes. It publishes August 4th and in all formats, audio and print, hardcover and ebook. Yeah.
And that's again with Putnam.
Yes. And also in 10 other countries. So
Congratulations, and thank you again. Thank you for coming to visit with us, Karen Dionne.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. Look for more episodes of All Right in Sin City wherever you listen to podcasts, or check out our website, allrightinsincity.com. For information and announcements of new podcasts, sign up to our email list or follow us on Facebook and Twitter.